Maria, I'm sorry. I've carried this for years, and no matter how much time passes, it still doesn't sit right. You were a Marine. You earned that title. You stood in formation. You wore the same uniform. You trusted the same system we all did. And we failed you. This isn't about headlines. This isn't about views. This isn't about turning tragedy into something people scroll past on their way to a dance video or a cat clip. This is about a Marine, a young woman, 8 months pregnant, who should have been preparing to hold her child. I remember the first time I held my daughter. It changes you. It humbles you. It makes the world stop for a moment. And every time I think about you, I think about the fact that you never got that moment. You never got to hold your baby. You never got to see who they would become. And that stays with me. Because this wasn't just a crime. It was a failure. A failure to protect one of our own. A failure to act when warning signs were there. A failure that cost a Marine her life. So before you click away, before you move on to the next viral distraction, I'm asking you to stay. Sit with this. Listen. Because this one is personal. Maria, I'm sorry. This is the Quiet Files. There was laughter that night. Music, beer bottles clinking, boots grinding into backyard dirt. A group of Marines stood around a fire pit, unwinding after long weeks, joking, talking, letting the night carry the weight for a while. On the surface, it looked normal, harmless, brothers in arms enjoying another evening together. The flames cracked and popped, smoke curled into the Carolina sky, sparks drifted upward and disappeared. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that beneath their boots, beneath the warmth of that fire, was one of their own. A fellow Marine, 8 months pregnant, buried in the very ground they were standing on. No one there understood the weight of that soil. No one realized the heat from the fire was rising over a secret that would later shake the core and devastate families. That's the part that haunts you, not just the crime, but the proximity, the normalcy, the laughter above silence. Because this didn't happen on some distant battlefield. It happened in a backyard, on American soil, among Marines who believed they were just enjoying another night. And somewhere in that dirt was a woman who wore the same uniform, who stood in formation, who trusted the same institution. She wasn't a headline yet. She wasn't national news. She was just missing. And while people searched, while her family prayed, while questions grew louder, the truth sat quietly under a fire pit. Hidden, in plain sight. The most disturbing evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it laughs. Sometimes it drinks. Sometimes it stands shoulder to shoulder with you, and you never see it. And beneath them, silence. Before there was a backyard, before there was a fire pit, there was a report. Maria had done what she was supposed to do. She followed procedure. She spoke up. She reported him. That matters, because this was not silence. This was not someone hiding in fear. This was a Marine using the system that was built to protect her. She reported sexual misconduct. She reported threats. She made it known that something was wrong. And when someone in uniform says they are not safe, the expectation is simple. You act. But action is not always immediate, and sometimes it is not enough. Maria was 8 months pregnant. Her due date was approaching. She had plans. She had a future that was already forming. Then she disappeared. At first, it was confusion, missed appointments, no contact, phone calls unanswered. Family members began to worry. Fellow Marines started asking questions. Superiors were notified. And still, time moved. Every missing persons case has a window, a moment where urgency matters most, where hours feel heavy, where decisions can change outcomes. And in this case, that window was closing. The man she reported denied everything. He maintained his innocence. He stayed present. He moved through his days, while she was nowhere to be found. Search efforts intensified. Investigators began retracing timelines, looking at movements, looking at inconsistencies, looking at him. What started as concern began shifting into suspicion, and suspicion into something darker. Because sometimes the truth doesn't hide far away. Sometimes it stays close, very close. The question was no longer just, where is Maria? The question was, what happened to her? And the answers were closer than anyone realized. Before the discovery, there was something worse. Doubt. When Maria went missing, not everyone believed she was in danger. Some thought she had run away. Some assumed she was trying to cause trouble. Some talked about her like she was the problem. They labeled her. They whispered. They reduced her to rumors. And that's how it happens. Not with sirens, not with alarms, but with dismissal. Corporal Laurean was well-liked, soft-spoken, polite, on track for promotion, married, disciplined. The kind of Marine people vouched for. Maria was young, pregnant, and in the middle of serious allegations. She said she had been assaulted. She said she had been threatened. And too many people treated it like revenge, like drama, like something messy that would eventually go away. But allegations like that don't just go away. They require separation, investigation, protection. They were not separated. They remained in the same environment, the same unit, the same orbit. That is where the system failed. What began as a consensual relationship shifted. Power changed, pressure changed, fear changed. She wanted out. She wanted protection. She wanted accountability. He wanted control. And when someone believes their reputation is stronger than your voice, danger grows. There were claims he wanted to take her to Mexico, to disappear, to avoid consequences. She refused. And when she refused, the situation escalated. The mild-mannered Marine, the one people described as respectful, disciplined, focused, became something else behind closed doors. That's the part people struggle with. Evil doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks dependable. Sometimes it looks promotable. Sometimes it wears rank. He invited her to his home, and after she would not comply, everything changed. When the unit learned she had been murdered, I remember that day, vividly. People cried, people were in shock, and there was something else in the room. Guilt. Because deep down, many of us knew we had dismissed her. We had heard the rumors, we had watched the tension, and we told ourselves it wasn't that serious. The Marine who was labeled, who was doubted, who was cast aside, was gone. And what makes it even heavier is that she wasn't alone. A baby was lost too. That is the kind of guilt that doesn't leave you, because this wasn't unpredictable. This wasn't random. This could have been prevented. And when something preventable happens, it changes how you see yourself, how you see the institution, how you see silence. We all carry a piece of it, and some of us will carry it forever. When someone disappears, there are always small details that surface first. Tiny fractures in the story. Maria's bank account showed activity, ATM withdrawals, after she was already missing. She wasn't answering calls. She wasn't contacting family. She wasn't showing up to appointments. But her card was moving. Withdrawals in nearby locations, quiet transactions, small amounts, enough to avoid attention, but not enough to avoid suspicion. Investigators began retracing those movements, looking at timestamps, security footage, patterns, and the circle narrowed again. Then there was the letter, a handwritten note left behind, addressed to his wife. In it, he admitted to killing Maria. He described panic, fear of consequences, and a plan to leave. The words were not poetic. They were not emotional. They were calculated, confessional. While investigators were building their case, he was already preparing to run. He purchased supplies, withdrew more cash, loaded his vehicle. Then he left, quietly, without warning. By the time authorities realized what was unfolding, he was gone. Flight changes everything. An innocent man does not disappear when questions are asked. An innocent man does not empty accounts and leave letters behind. Now this was no longer just a missing Marine. This was a fugitive. And the backyard, the fire pit, the soil became more than suspicion. It became the center of the investigation. Because when someone confesses and runs, the truth is not far behind. The digging would come next, but by then, the illusion was already broken. When investigators began excavating the fire pit, they did not rush. They documented everything, every layer of soil, every fragment, every shift in texture. What they uncovered confirmed the worst: human remains, burned, buried, hidden beneath ash and earth. This was not disappearance. This was concealment. Forensic teams worked carefully, methodically, collecting evidence, preserving what little was left. The fire pit had not been the site of the killing. It had been the attempt to erase it. The house told a different story. Inside, there were signs of struggle, physical evidence that contradicted the illusion of calm. What happened did not unfold in a backyard. It began indoors, behind closed doors. A confrontation, an escalation, a decision. And in that moment, 2 lives were ended. A young Marine, 8 months pregnant, a child who had not yet taken a breath. Investigators reconstructed the sequence, the timeline, the movement from the house to the yard, from violence to concealment. Fire was used to destroy evidence, to hide what had been done. But fire does not erase truth, it only delays it. When the remains were identified, finality set in. There was no more hoping she would walk through the door, no more possibility of misunderstanding, just confirmation. She had been killed, in a home she entered believing she would leave, and buried in a yard where laughter would later echo above her. That is the weight of this crime, not just that she died, but that she trusted, and that trust was answered with violence. The fire pit became evidence, the house became evidence, and the illusion of normal was gone forever. Running sounds powerful in theory. In reality, it is exhausting. After the letter was found, after the withdrawals were traced, after the backyard became a crime scene, he knew. The walls were closing in. A fugitive's world shrinks quickly. Highways feel longer, gas stations feel brighter, every passing police cruiser feels personal. Sleep becomes shallow, thoughts become loud. Every unexpected sound feels like discovery. He had planned for distance, cash, supplies, movement. But you cannot plan for inevitability. Law enforcement was no longer speculating. They were coordinating. Across agencies, across borders, vehicle information circulated, financial trails followed, communications traced. He fled south, crossed into Mexico, believing geography could create separation, believing distance would buy time. It didn't. Authorities tracked him to Tlaquepaque, a city near Guadalajara. He had been moving carefully, trying to blend in, trying to stay unnoticed. Mexican federal authorities located him and moved in. There was no dramatic chase, no exchange of gunfire, no last-minute escape attempt. He was taken into custody without incident, detained, identified, and held while extradition proceedings began. The running stopped there, in a quiet Mexican city, far from the backyard, far from the base, far from the illusion that distance equals freedom. He was returned to the United States, returned to face charges, returned to a system he believed he could outrun. You can run from a place, you can run from a question, you can even run from a courtroom, but you cannot outrun evidence, you cannot outrun coordination, and you cannot outrun what you did. Eventually, the running ends, not because you choose it to, but because there is nowhere left to go. When he was returned to the United States, the running was over. Now came judgment. The trial brought everything into the open: the relationship, the allegations, the confrontation, the concealment. Evidence was presented: the letter, the financial records, the forensic findings, the timeline reconstructed piece by piece. The illusion of misunderstanding was gone. This was not confusion. This was not an accident. This was deliberate. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. A courtroom decision, final, permanent. But even a life sentence cannot restore what was taken, because the real weight of this crime was never just in the charges, it was in the people left behind. Maria's mother sat through that trial, listened to the evidence, heard the details no parent should ever have to hear. And instead of retreating into silence, she chose something else. She chose advocacy. She began speaking about sexual assault within the military, about the cost of dismissal, about what happens when allegations are minimized, about the urgency of protecting service members who come forward. She carried her daughter's name into rooms where policy was discussed, where reforms were debated, where accountability was demanded. Grief did not break her, it transformed her. Because strength does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a mother standing in front of lawmakers, refusing to let her daughter be remembered as a rumor. Maria was not drama. She was not revenge. She was not a distraction. She was a Marine, a daughter, a mother-to-be, and her case forced conversations that should have already been happening about sexual assault, about power imbalance, about what protection truly means. Justice, in a courtroom sense, was delivered, but justice in a cultural sense is still something we work toward. And every time her mother speaks, every time her name is mentioned in discussions about reform, Maria's story continues to matter, not as tragedy alone, but as warning, as change, as legacy. Maria. I've told this story the best way I know how, carefully, truthfully, without turning it into spectacle. But there's something I need to say plainly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we didn't see it clearly enough. I'm sorry the warning signs weren't taken seriously. I'm sorry that your voice wasn't protected the way it should have been. You wore the same uniform. You stood in the same formation. You trusted the same system we all trusted. And when you needed it most, it failed you. I remember the day we found out. The silence, the disbelief, the guilt that settled in the room. And that guilt doesn't disappear. It stays with you. It shows up in quiet moments. It shows up when you hold your own child. It shows up when you think about what could have been done differently. A Marine was lost. A mother-to-be was lost. A child never had the chance to live. And I carry that. Not as shame alone, but as responsibility. Responsibility to say your name. Responsibility to tell the truth. Responsibility to make sure you are remembered as more than a rumor, more than a headline, more than a case file. If you've stayed with this story until now, thank you, truly. Because stories like this are hard to sit with. They are uncomfortable. They demand reflection. But they matter. Share Maria's story. Talk about it. Remember it. Because silence is what allowed this to grow, and awareness is what prevents it from happening again. She deserves that. Other victims deserve that. Maria, I'm sorry. We will not let you be forgotten. This is the Quiet Files.